Good morning, friends. Welcome to chapel. It is a dark and cold and wet day outside, so I'm delighted to see that so many of you have joined us in this warm and safe and peaceful space today with all the twinkly lights around. So I invite you to absorb the light of this place, absorb the peace as we enter into a time of stillness together. My name is Irene Kragel, and I'm the director at the Center for Counseling and Wellness. While I'm here, I'd like to put in a plug for you all to come visit us. We're happy to support students here at Calvin, and we have lots of great mental health resources for you that are free for Calvin students. One of the things we offer is something called a Mindfulness Meditation group. I lead the group. The goal is to introduce students to the practice of mindfulness, which helps us calm ourselves, find peace in the midst of life's storms. And I'm guessing a few of you have some storms going on today, even internally, as the semester ramps up. So I'd like to invite you to join me today for a practice of mindfulness. Just a little bit of background before we enter into that. One of the things that we practice with mindfulness is called a loving kindness practice. And the idea of this, when it's practiced in a secular fashion, is that we extend good wishes to ourselves, to others, to the whole world. It's a beautiful practice in and of itself, but we have this opportunity as Christians to add a prayer-like quality to the meditation. And so I call this a blessing meditation. That's what we'll be doing together today, is practicing blessing, receiving blessing ourselves, receiving God's grace, which is freely available for us, and then practicing extending that blessing out to a few different groups of people. So after we begin with ourselves, we'll go on to bless somebody that we love or care about. We will bless somebody that we don't know very well, an acquaintance or a stranger. We'll send that blessing to somebody who's difficult for us, a good Christian practice, right? We will extend that blessing also to the whole world, to all the people and all of the living things in the world. So that's what's ahead of us. When we practice mindfulness, the primary goal is to be present to whatever is in the moment. So with all of the things going on in your mind, I'm sure even as I've been speaking here, you've already been thinking about things from the past and things that are coming up in the future. That's very normal. And so I invite you to practice with me, bringing your mind into the present moment. This is where God is. This is where we have the opportunity to meet with God. God is right here available for us. So we'll be taking the next few minutes to be present in this space where God is as we practice grace, as we practice receiving and extending blessing. As we enter this, just know there's no exact right way to practice mindfulness meditation. So I will give you some instructions in terms of how you might want to sit. If you're sitting in a chair, that's fine. If you'd like to come sit on the floor here, there's some mats as well down here. So you're invited to follow some of those instructions I give you, and you're also invited not to follow those instructions if it's not comfortable for you or if it doesn't support an attitude of prayerfulness and presence for you. And same as we go through these groups of people, if there's any point at which you need to take a break, that's okay too. So know that you get to decide how you go through this practice together. The only other thing I'll mention is that I will be using a bell just to help gather our attention at the beginning and then to close out our practice. So there's nothing in particular special about the bell other than it's a really beautiful sound. So when I ring it, you can just consider that an invitation to come into God's presence and enter into this practice of blessing, and then I'll ring it again at the end as we close our practice. So I invite you now to settle into a stable position where you are, a stable and a dignified position, and begin by tuning your ears to the sound of this bell, seeing if you can listen all the way from the beginning of the ring until it trails off into space and can no longer be heard. So allowing yourself to settle in here so that your body is both alert and also relaxed. So if you'd like, you can put your feet flat on the floor, your hands in your lap, your spine straightened, your head reaching up toward the sky. Not straining, just finding a position here that's both comfortable and at ease, while also having a little bit of energy and stability, as much as is possible for you. And so noticing this chair or floor that God has provided for you to hold you up. Noticing this body that God has created. This moment that's available for you to connect with God's compassion and grace. And you might feel the points where your body makes contact here with the chair or the floor, with your clothing, with the air. Perhaps noticing the sensations of air on your hands, your face, maybe the top of your scalp. Feeling the weight of your body in the chair, gravity holding you here. And so taking a moment to become aware of physical sensations throughout your body, giving yourself permission to release any tension that you might find there. Settling into this place where God is. And becoming aware now of your breathing, if you choose. So if you prefer not to focus on your breath, it's fine to choose a different place to focus, a different anchor for your attention, such as your feet touching the floor, maybe even something that you can see, a color. But if you choose focusing your attention on your breath, noticing the physical sensations of breath moving in and out of your lungs. If you'd like, it can help to take 3 long, slow, deep breaths in and out. Centering your awareness here on your breathing. And then allowing your breath to return to its normal rate and rhythm. No need to control the breath, just noticing your body breathing itself in God's presence. So letting yourself experience a moment of stillness here. And as we move into our blessing meditation, you can begin by creating an image of yourself in your mind. This could be you as you are now, or maybe you as a small child. So doing your best to cultivate a soft and loving heart towards yourself as this image comes to mind. Extending grace and love to yourself. It's an option to put your hand on your heart if you would like, feeling the warmth of your hand there. And imagine yourself, if you choose, cupped here in God's hands. Just letting yourself rest here in God's loving hands for a moment. And extending a blessing to yourself by saying each of these phrases silently after me in your mind. May I know God's love. May I know God's joy. May I know God's rest. May I know God's peace. As much as you're able, opening your heart to receive this blessing. Not simply in your thoughts, but cultivating a knowing of God's presence in your body and in your breath. May I know God's love. May I know God's joy. May I know God's rest. May I know God's peace. May I know God's love. May I know God's joy. May I know God's rest. May I know God's peace. Repeating these phrases as often as you'd like in your mind and in your heart as you receive God's blessing and grace. And now bringing to mind somebody that you care about, somebody that you love. This could be a close friend, a family member, a mentor, somebody that brings you deep feelings of love and tenderness and care. This could even be somebody that you've never met, someone who inspires you or uplifts you, encourages you. As this person comes to mind, imagining them in your mind's eye. Opening your heart to them, extending love and grace to this person that you admire or care about. And if you'd like, you can imagine this person cupped in God's hands, just letting them rest in God's hands for a moment. And imagining this person that you care about in your mind as you say, may you know God's love. May you know God's joy. May you know God's rest. May you know God's peace. Extending this blessing to this person that you care about, noticing any feelings of warmth that might come up in your heart. May you know God's love. May you know God's joy. May you know God's rest. May you know God's peace. May you know God's love. May you know God's joy. May you know God's rest. May you know God's peace. Bringing to mind now a stranger. So this is somebody that you might not know their name, somebody towards whom you have neutral feelings. So it could be somebody that you see regularly, someone you've just passed on the path. As this person comes to mind, imagine them in your mind's eye, recognizing that although you do not know them, they also have a life full of hopes and fears as you have. They too wish to be happy as you do. And so open your heart to this person you don't know and extend love and grace towards them, imagining them cupped in God's hands if you choose, just letting them rest there in God's loving hands for a moment. And imagining this stranger in your mind as you say, may you know God's love. May you know God's joy. May you know God's rest. May you know God's peace. May you know God's love. May you know God's joy. May you know God's rest. May you know God's peace. May you know God's love. May you know God's joy. May you know God's rest. May you know God's peace. Bringing to mind now somebody that is difficult for you. So this could be someone that's caused tension or anger or other kinds of difficult emotions when you've interacted with them. This doesn't need to be the most difficult person in your life, so no need to lift up the 100-pound weight here. but somebody that's caused you some type of pain or someone you don't get along with very well. And as this person comes to mind, imagining them in your mind's eye, doing your best to hold them gently in your heart, feelings of benevolence and gentleness. And if there are feelings of anger or tension that arise, you can notice those thoughts and feelings with some curiosity and also kindness toward yourself in this moment. Letting go of any attachment to these emotions as you open your heart to set those feelings free to God's care. And so imagining this difficult person cupped in God's hands. Just letting them rest in God's loving hands for a moment. And imagining this difficult person in your mind as you say, may you know God's love. May you know God's joy. May you know God's rest. May you know God's peace. And if this is difficult, you might return to extending blessing to yourself, recognizing that it is you who is hurting in this moment and in need of compassion, and that God is near to the brokenhearted. May I know God's love. May I know God's joy. May I know God's rest. May I know God's peace. And then if you choose, when you're ready, extending blessing again to this difficult person who's also in need of compassion. May you know God's love. May you know God's joy. May you know God's rest. May you know God's peace. And finally, bringing to mind all of God's creation, all beings everywhere. So recognizing that all are held by God, sustained by God's love. You might imagine this whole beautiful earth in your mind, full of plants and animals and so many people. This whole world here in God's upturned palm. And so imagining all of these beings in the world, as you say, may you know God's love. May you know God's joy. May you know God's rest. May you know God's peace. May you know God's love. May you know God's joy. May you know God's rest. May you know God's peace. And so resting now here in God's blessing, resting in this stillness that you've cultivated, that we've cultivated together. If you choose opening yourself up to God's presence in this place, in this moment. And seeing if it's possible to allow this blessing to rest in your heart and your body and in your mind. As you listen now to the sound of the bell from the beginning of the ring until it can no longer be heard. And so I encourage you to move gently into the rest of your day, carrying this blessing along with you, carrying the twinkle of these lights around us in your heart as you go out into the rain again. And I encourage you to hold yourself and others gently as you rest in this compassion and grace of God through the rest of the day. Thank you for joining me. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.